What's up, Diablo 4 players? Let's go over all of the best uniques in Season 4 that every single class can actually run. So, let's go ahead and get started with the Uber uniques. And if you're normally a player that says, man, I never get Uber uniques, this season, no, you can get the Uber uniques. You get 3 sparks guaranteed for free. If you want to make another character complete the Iron Wolves quest line, you can get a 4th one, and you don't have to do any of the Uber bosses. But if you do the Uber bosses, the level 200 ones, those ones have basically 5 times the drop. So it's more realistic if you hated doing the Uber bosses. It's realistic in this season to kind of get them because the lesser Uber bosses also have 0.5% chance to drop a Uber unique, which if it's a bad one, you can just salvage it. So let's get started. So starting right off with Endaryl's Visage. This is basically one of the worst Uber uniques in the game. Unfortunately, it does not have a place. It only had a place with the Shred Druid, and Shred Druid doesn't really exist too much anymore. So unfortunately, it's just outclassed. And a lot of these get outclassed because we have the new temper system that allows us to put these mods on things that normally you wouldn't be able to have in Season 4. So Endaryl's is just kind of bad. The only thing that's special is a life seal, which gives you kind of like some sort of way to recover, but you can just run Undying, which is an aspect, and it's like just as good. And on top of that, you can have cooldown reduction. Cooldown reduction, very good stat. It does have attack speed, which is kind of nice, but overall, probably one of the weakest Uber uniques to ever exist in the game. Next up, we have the Spear of Lycander. This is not necessarily a tier list, but I may reference, this is basically F tier though. This is like one of the worst. This one over here is weird because the Spear of Lycander has this awesome stat where you have crit strike, trance, and attack speed. Those are awesome abilities. And then on top of that, you have chance to stun. But nowadays, there's so many things that you can temper on as far as stun goes, so it loses out on its like special kind of power with that. But the unique power of gaining a random shrine effect could be used, and in theory, RNG with, like, you know, people consistently trying to top the leaderboards. Sometimes the cheese does prevail, and what I mean by that is if you get really lucky, you get a conduit or get artillery shrine back to back to back, you could clear out and get the fastest gauntlet speed time. You could get maybe the highest pit clear without you really like skilling it. It's just random if it rolls that correct shrine. If you get the correct shrine multiple times, yeah, you could win. So first, the cheese department, I mean, you could see some play with it. I would put it maybe in like the B tier if I was to kind of make a tier list here with this, but overall it is pretty solid for that. But if I was to just equip the thing permanently and play with it, hell no. And the reason why is because, well, losing out on the ability to have double attacks is just way too good. Like if you're playing Frozen Orb, you have chance for double attacks, but it is cheesy specifically for the sorceress to maybe clear things that they shouldn't be able to. Next up, the Doombringer. This is another really solid item. I'd put it in like the B tier. It's really good for defensive stats. So if you're playing Barbarian, you're maybe playing Thorns Barb, you get crazy amount of life, crazy amounts of thorns. It's great for that reason. And with Rogue, there is some extra defensive stats. So it does have a place in the game. It's just super defensive. However, nowadays, you can roll maximum life on a lot of different things, specifically on weapons and offhands. So it does lose a little bit of like viability because this was super good for the defensive stats, but you can get like 40, 50k life on Barbarian very comfortably with Doombringer Grandfather combos. But very solid. Next up, we have what I would probably consider in the S tier, and it's actually S tier for a reason that you might not think. So Harlequin Crest, really good thing because it gives you damage reduction, which is now a premium stat, plus 4 ranks to all of the skills. Amazing item. But actually, surprisingly, in Season 4, because we don't have the ability to get all stats, they reduced on the Paragon board a lot of the stats required to reach the yellow threshold where you get to get a bonus stat. Now, the Harlequin Crest gives you all stats, so you can hit a lot of other bonuses. You can get maybe like 5-10% damage reduction, 16% extra bonus damage or more resistances because you hit the bonus threshold when you start masterworking, and then you hit that on a crit basically. And especially if you get this greater affixed and got a bunch of all stats, it's actually really good for that. But on top of that, it's already ideally one of the best in the slot for a lot of different builds, but don't think that you have to have this. It's probably one of the most versatile and like objectively one of like the items that most people can put in most slots. But yeah, Harlequin Crest definitely one of the better ones out of all the Uber uniques. Melted Heart of Selig does add some huge amount of defensive stats, also giving you a massive amount of maximum resource and damage while healthy. Plus, it's got move speed, and again, that all stats. I'd honestly consider this like in the B or A tier. It's a really good Uber unique, and that is because, again, all stats. If you get 2 or 3 extra, like, gold nodes on your Paragon board, it's definitely not a bad thing to consider. That's why it's actually good. And it does have some defensive stats, but losing out on the ability to get the 50% bonus on the amulet, while it is kind of big, I mean, well, if you get the damage while healthy, I mean, it rolls pretty high once you start masterworking it. It's not bad at all. If you hit it on that, it's pretty dang nice. Plus, you can also hit all stats. That's another thing. If you get greater affix and get more all stats, it's pretty solid. Next up, another really good one over here. This is what I consider like probably around in the A or B tier, and it depends on the build that you play, but being able to get an insane amount of resource cost reduction, and on top of that getting 40x multiplicative damage, and you get perfect lucky hit, you get perfect crit strike chance. Now, crit strike damage and core damage, it doesn't really matter too much. They've fixed a lot of the bugs with core skill damage double dipping, but it's still a pretty solid item overall for the resource cost reduction. And then another thing that a lot of people don't consider is the double resistances on this item. So you can see it rolls with 2 resistance to all elements. That's actually a nice stat because you might not need to put in another like few things in your Paragon or whatever if you needed to get all those resistance caps, giving you some extra skill points over there. Next up, as far as his grandfather goes, it's actually pretty solid in the defensive departments plus the all stats, which I've mentioned several times, but there's a big thing that kind of sucks with grandfather, and well, it used to be like a definitely an S tier one. It is definitely fallen down a couple tiers, maybe in the B or even C tier now, because you lose out on that temporary. There's a lot of endgame builds that just can't run grandfather because you're losing out on a two-handed that you can go ahead and temper and get some crazier stats. Again, when you temper it on a two-hander and you get crazy 50+% chance to use a skill again or something like that, it's too much damage to lose out on. It is massive. However, it's not a useless thing. It really depends on your build, but something like Necromancer probably can't make great use out of it because tempering is simply too strong. Next up though, the Tierlist Might. How is this thing? Well, even though I moused over this and it says for the special power, while at full life your skills unleash a divine barrage dealing 0 damage. Doesn't sound exciting. That thing actually scales with your character, however, it seems to actually have kind of a cap on what you can do. Basically, in open world content, if you want to run something like a Whirlwind Barb, you can just start one-shotting everything. It is super satisfying to play for open world. But if you're like, I want to do it hardcore endgame content, like I want to do like the pit, the hard stuff, it doesn't really help out too much for that. But where it does help out is that maximum to all resistance. That is actually huge because the only other thing that gives you that is like Tacitus of the Dawning Sky, which, let's be honest, no one plays this thing. So this thing over here actually becomes quite great for that. Plus you get all stats, and I've talked about it already like 10 times in this video. All stats equals good because you can hit more things on your Paragon. But on top of getting damage reduction is pretty dang good. And you get resistance to all elements. And all of those are going to be perfect because it's an uber unique. They always drop with perfect stats. But if you get that thing greater affix for maximum to all resistance, oh man, you just hit the jackpot, because even though you only get 70 to your resistances, you can extend that even further because maximum resistance to all elements will exponentially increase your damage reduction. And you get flat damage reduction on this. We're talking about an insane amount of damage reduction that you can get with this, and probably one of the best items in the entire game as far as a special chest piece for damage reduction. Again, damage reduction doesn't really roll on pieces of gear anymore, other than uniques. That is kind of a special thing now. Alright, so now that we went over the uber uniques, which ones would I actually craft? So the ones that I would craft for, again, most builds, Harlequin Crest probably one of the best ones, and then maybe Reading the Star in the Skies and Tyrell's Might are probably the ones that you may want to have your eyes on. Now, what about the other ones here? Well, Banished Lord's Talisman is still pretty good. It's like an easy, great go-to, and the reason why it's really good is because it gives you the ability to overpower on builds that wouldn't have been able to. Next up, the Fist of Fate. This is just fallen off the planet because it's so bad, because a lot of the temper mods you can just throw on in your helmet, your gloves, whatever, chance to daze, immobilize, stun, slow. It just loses out on what it used to be able to do. Plus you're losing out on the plus ranks of core skills, which now if you drop as greater affix go even crazier. So this unfortunately doesn't really have a place in the game. Just sell it to the vendor, man. Alright, Flicker Step. It does have some place in the game if you want to use some sort of ultimate build and you want to spam it. Heck, it's not even that bad on the Necromancer for the ability to go ahead and continuously spam on your ultimate. If you just want to kind of play a little like hop back and forth, I do like it for that. So Flicker Step, not a bad item at all. Next up, Frostburn. This is absolutely just vendor it. It is terrible. This is more like a niche sort of thing. Obviously, not every build will want it. But as far as Frostburn goes, just throw it in the garbage. No one's going to want it. The Lucky Hit special unique power can literally be a tempered mod on the item now and you lose core skills. So just, it's not useful. Godslayer. Actually a really good one. So this one is actually great if you are interested in just like one-shotting a boss. You want to do some sort of combo. It's not bad for that. Plus it rolls cooldown reduction on life. Pretty solid item overall. And I could highly recommend it if you are doing like a combo-based build. But overall, it's still not bad because it helps out with clear speed because it gives you the big suck, right? Sucks everything in. Mother's Embrace. This thing has been bad at the launch, and is it good now? No. Now, it does have all stats, but it's still, unfortunately, just kind of bad. There's really no point of this item. I think that they need to relook at this because it definitely needs a buff, considering it's like the item that you get for killing Lilith, and it's just bad. Next up, the Pain Gorger. This is probably one of the best things in Season 4 because it enables the Bash Barbarian. Also, there are some rogue builds that I've seen using it with like Heart Seeker. It's a really cool item that gives you massive amount of damage to your basic skills, and it is build enabling. Probably one of my favorite ones. Probably like an A or S tier one because, again, it's one of the uniques that actually allows for a build to be one of the best builds, which is the Bash Barbarian. Really good stuff. Penitent Greaves over here, unfortunately, now these aren't really that great. And the reason why is because that whole Frost Chill, you get to do a 15x multiplicative damage. Well, you lose out on the ability to temper additional movement speed, which is what boots are good for. Also life, also the mana regen that boots can actually roll naturally now. It's a huge L in terms of like what you're losing out on. And if you're thinking, well, it's good because you can still get damage. Unless you're using it specifically for that chill effect, unfortunately, it's still not good because you can just roll the aspect that gives you a chance to daze, and when you daze the enemy, you can get 20x multiplicative damage, which means that that number is higher, plus you can get your character's main stat, and it's just, unfortunately, there's really no place for this unless you really need that chill or crowd control condition, but you can get that on almost anything now. You can just temper that on as like the secondary thing, so it's not bad to go ahead and just roll those other mods, so therefore Penitent Greaves is now bad, if that makes sense. So anyways, Soulbrand, if you rolled this thing with greater affixes and you get like maybe some sort of build where you can upkeep barrier with like, let's say, Temerity over here where you can permanently have barrier and you're running a build that like always has barrier, you get 20% damage reduction over there while you have a barrier, but the whole potion grants you 200%. I mean, there is some combos with it, but unless it rolls like trip or greater affix, because that damage reduction from close is actually pretty good. A lot of people think this thing is absolutely garbage, and they're not necessarily wrong. There's just better things at the end of the day. But if it rolls greater affix with a damage reduction, hey, that's a stat that you can't really get anymore, and that could actually be pretty good, especially because you get another 20%. So again, if that rolls greater affix on damage reduction from close, and it rolls like high 20% damage reduction, it's really not that bad. It's like maybe like a C tier one. It's still usable, but then you also lose out on mana regen, so most people won't want it. Test of the Dawning Sky. Unfortunately, you have to take the first hit, so if you would prevent the one shot, it doesn't really work. Unfortunately, it's just not ever been good, and it makes me sad because I thought this thing was kind of a cool design in terms of the way it works. So you get extra plus maximum resistances, but that can't even greater affix roll on it, and you can't even masterwork it to be higher. Next up, Tabal, it's one of the best items in the entire game because why? It gives you maximum resource, which definitely helps out with a lot of builds. You also get damage reduction, which is another great stat, but then on top of that, it also has that ability to give you more resource, and some builds, they may need this, so it's great for that. And then on top of that, even though it did get nerfed, it's still objectively one of the best in the offensive category for the pants. So really good. I would say it's like in the A or S tier. Next up, Razorplate. If you are playing a Thorns build, it is absolutely required. It's an S tier. It's a build enabling build. The Thorns Barbarian is one of the strongest builds in the game as well. So great item for that. There's also a Thorns Rogue build. If you guys haven't seen that, I'll link it down below. It's actually a very unique build because the Rogue is the only class without hitting a shrine that can actually hit a crit on Thorns, which exponentially increases your damage. It's crazy, and that might be a very strong build that is kind of like unknown in the community right now, but it's because, well, you're going to need to try to get, you know, all the stats to roll really good on Thorns because, well, the Rogue can't naturally get it. Next up, Temerity. As far as it goes, if you need barrier for like some sort of special bonuses, it can be used like with like the swell aspect for like the sorceress, but unfortunately it doesn't have enough defensive stats and you lose out on that damage reduction. Like the life is great, but then the rest of the stats are kind of just mid, so like you're losing out on, let's say, your character's main stat. You can lose out on extra like plus ranks to some sort of ability or something like that, so it does lose out on a lot of it. Unfortunately, even though it sounds really good, and, like, you know, so you have 80%, I have a perfect one, I don't even use it, just because like you can get like your main stats, so you can get more damage and more resistances if you're playing like another build, or you can get armor if you're playing you know, Barb with strength, and you're also losing out on maybe another like resistance roll. And then as far as X-Falls goes, it is definitely usable, definitely like an A tier one, and that is because, well, some builds, they definitely utilize this, right? It's a great thing for any damage over time builds if you can make great use out of the special ability. And also has cooldown reduction, which normally doesn't roll on rings. And then Yen's Blessing. How is this new thing? I actually messed around with this thing with the sorceress, and you can perma keep up one of your like, you can keep up Ice Shield, which can give you extra damage as well. So it is actually a pretty good item specifically for that reason. So how it works is you have a chance well, skills on cooldown to actually utilize a non-mobility, non-ultimate, which is usually what you would want. It does have some like niche sort of use, but it also has damage reduction from close enemies. It also has movement speed and vulnerable, and you also have a chance to restore primary resource, which it doesn't normally roll on boots. So it is kind of a niche, weird thing, and I'm going to put it kind of in like the B-ish tier. It's a very, very niche thing for someone that maybe can figure out how to make use out of this, you could have like one skill that you really want. Now, unfortunately, the skill that actually gets to cast itself again, so to speak, is random. If you could designate it like it said your skill in the first slot, this would actually be a really cool item. They actually buffed this because in PTR, no one really cared about it. It used to be 12 seconds, now it's 8. If they made it like 1 second, I think that this would be, wow, it would be like god tier. But unfortunately, it's not very good at the moment, but it could have some sort of niche sort of play when someone figures out some cool idea with it. But that's as far as the uniques go. Those are the good and the bad ones, and I will be covering some of the other ones later down the line in the other classes, as I didn't really want to make this video too long, because if we covered every single class, this video would be like an hour long. So if you guys want to see more maybe niche ones for very specific classes, and this is your first time here, hit subscribe, turn the bell, and let me know your thoughts down below on which uniques you guys like, or if I missed out anything, let me know down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.